The wind carried dust across the open plains, dry and sharp against the skin, the kind of air that seemed to whisper of hard times and harder lives. The land was quiet, except for the call of a distant crow and the creak of wagon wheels making their way along a worn trail. Life out here was not easy, and yet people clung to it because it was the only way they knew. It was a world of survival where every stranger could mean danger and every sunrise promised another test. By the side of the trail, a figure lay motionless against the tall grass. His chest rose and fell, but weakly, like a fire that had nearly burned itself out. His skin carried the bronze tone of the Apache, and his eyes were sharp even in pain. Yet his legs, twisted beneath him, refused to obey. Once he had been proud, a warrior who could run across the hills faster than most horses, but now the earth held him still as though it had claimed him early. His people were far away, scattered by battle and loss, and the strength that once made him feared had turned into the heavy silence of helplessness. Not far from him, a small wagon rattled over the rocks, pulled by a single mule that looked as worn as the wheels it dragged. Inside sat a woman with tired eyes but steady hands, the kind of woman the frontier shaped into steel without ever asking if she wanted to be. Her daughter sat beside her, legs swinging, a little girl no older than 7. She had the brightness of youth, the sort of innocence that had not yet learned to measure people by tribe, color, or blood. Her eyes searched the land as though every shadow held a story waiting to be told. When the wagon stopped, the girl was the first to notice the man in the grass. She tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing with urgency, her small voice cutting through the dusty air. "Mama, look. Someone's there." The woman's hand tightened on the reins, her eyes narrowing as she followed her daughter's gaze. Out here you didn't stop for every cry, not unless you were ready to pay the price. An injured man could be bait for an ambush, or worse, a rival tribe scout left to lure the unwary close. But the girl's pleading eyes made her heart waver. She knew what it was to be left with nothing, to cling to a single thread of mercy. They approached slowly, the wagon creaking closer until the figure in the grass turned his head. His eyes met theirs, dark, full of pain and pride, yet unwilling to beg. He had the look of a man who would rather die on the ground than ask for help. The woman studied him carefully. She recognized the beads woven into his hair, the faint paint still clinging to his skin. An Apache. Her breath caught, and memories rushed back of raids, of fires in the night, of screams carried on the wind. Fear rose in her chest, but she steadied it. This was one man, broken and alone. The girl, however, saw none of that. She hopped down from the wagon, her boots landing in the dust with a soft thud. Without hesitation, she trotted toward him, her small frame bold against the wide emptiness of the land. The Apache warrior shifted, trying to sit taller, but the weight of his useless legs dragged him back. He watched the child come near, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Children of settlers were not meant to approach his kind. Yet here she was, her braids bouncing with each step, her smile as fearless as the morning sun. She stopped just a few feet from him, tilting her head with a kind of curiosity that only children carry. For a moment, she simply looked at him, taking in his torn shirt, the beads of sweat along his brow, the way his hands pressed into the dirt as if willing himself to rise. Then she spoke, her voice soft yet certain, the words rolling out as if they carried the weight of a promise. "My mom can make you walk again." The Apache's jaw tightened, his breath coming heavier, as though the words struck deeper than the wound in his body. His people did not believe in the healing hands of settlers. They had their own ways, their own spirits, their own medicine. Yet here stood a child, claiming something impossible. For the first time in days, he felt something stir within him, not hope exactly, but the faintest echo of it. The woman caught the words as she stepped down from the wagon, her heart tightening. She had not promised such a thing, not in years. She had once been known for her skill, for her ability to tend broken bones and bring fevered men back from the brink. But life had stolen much from her, and her gift had become a burden she carried quietly. Her daughter's words now pulled her into a moment she could not easily escape. The Apache looked from the child to the mother, his eyes sharp, questioning. He did not speak, but his silence was louder than any demand. It was as though he dared her to prove the truth in the girl's bold claim. The woman hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. She felt the old weight pressing down on her, the knowledge that if she tried and failed, it would not just be her skill that broke. It would be the fragile trust her daughter had placed in her. The little girl reached for the man's hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his calloused palm without fear. "Don't worry," she said, her voice steady. "Mama helps everyone." "She help you too." The land seemed to hold its breath. The crow that had been circling above drifted lower, its wings silent against the sky. Even the mule stood still, ears twitching as though it sensed the gravity of the moment. The mother's heart pounded in her chest, torn between fear of what this man represented and the unshakable innocence of her child. The Apache's eyes softened for the briefest instant, not toward the woman, but toward the girl. In her, he saw something his world had long denied him: unfiltered trust. He squeezed her hand, his strength faint but real, as if to accept her promise. The woman took a slow step forward, dust curling around her boots. She knew this decision would change everything. Helping him could bring danger, could stir anger among both settlers and natives alike. Yet turning away would mean betraying not just her daughter's faith, but the part of herself she thought had died long ago. As she knelt beside him, reaching toward the leg twisted unnaturally beneath him, a shadow moved in the distance. Her eyes flicked up, catching sight of a figure far across the ridge, watching. The Apache saw it too, his eyes narrowing, the muscles in his jaw tensing with sudden alarm. The little girl, still holding his hand, looked between them with confusion. "Mama?" she whispered. The woman's heart thundered. Whoever was out there was not alone. And whatever choice she made in the next breath would decide whether they lived to see another dawn. The Apache tightened his grip on the girl's hand, his voice finally breaking through the silence, low and urgent. "They are coming." And with that, the stillness of the plains shattered into a moment of unbearable tension. Leaving the promise of healing balanced against the edge of a new danger, the mother froze where she knelt, her fingers just inches from the Apache's injured leg. Her breath caught as the weight of his warning sank in. She didn't know who those figures were on the ridge, but she knew well enough that no one out here meant safety. Her mind raced, wondering if they had already been seen, if the sight of her wagon and mule had given away their position. The little girl clung tighter to the man's rough hand, her wide eyes flicking between her mother and the stranger who had spoken so suddenly. The Apache's voice was firm but quiet, not friends. "You must hide." He tried to push himself upright, his arms straining with all their remaining strength, but his legs dragged uselessly beneath him. Anger and shame crossed his face, the pain of being a warrior trapped in a broken body. Still, he fought against the earth, unwilling to be seen as helpless prey before enemies. The woman's heart pounded. She knew her wagon wasn't much cover, but it was all they had. She glanced at the tall grass swaying around them, at the dirt trail stretching endlessly in both directions. There was nowhere safe, only choices that might buy them a little more time. She grabbed her daughter's shoulder firmly. "Stay close to me." The little girl nodded, her lips pressed tight, but her hand still refused to let go of the Apache's. Her trust in him was unshaken, though danger loomed across the ridge. The mother saw it and knew it would slow them, yet something inside her hesitated to force them apart. The figures on the ridge shifted, no longer still. She counted 3, maybe 4 shapes, too far to see clearly but moving with purpose. Her stomach twisted. They could be drifters, outlaws, or even scouts from another tribe. Whoever they were coming closer. The Apache's eyes locked on hers. "If they find me here, they kill me. If they see you with me, they kill you too." His words were heavy, spoken with the certainty of a man who had lived with danger his entire life. The woman swallowed hard. The land had taught her never to trust too quickly, yet here she was, torn between leaving this broken man behind or risking her daughter's life by helping him. She remembered her girl's words, the bold promise spoken without hesitation. "My mom can make you walk again." Could she really turn away now? The mule stomped nervously, tugging at the reins tied to the wagon. The creak of leather filled the silence, reminding them how exposed they were. The woman made her choice in an instant. She slipped an arm beneath the Apache's shoulders, motioning to her daughter. "Help me," she whispered. The girl obeyed, using all her little strength to steady his arm as they pulled him toward the wagon. The Apache tried to resist, pride flashing in his eyes, but his body betrayed him. Each movement sent pain shooting through him, but he did not cry out. His jaw tightened, his breath hissed between clenched teeth, and still he let them drag him to the side of the wagon. They lowered him into the shadow of the wheels, half hidden by the grass. The woman's hand shook as she tugged a rough blanket over him, pressing a finger to her lips. "Stay quiet," she said. The girl knelt beside him, refusing to let go of his hand even now. He looked down at her, and for the first time in years, a faint warmth touched his hardened face. She had no fear of him, no bitterness for what his people had done in the past. To her, he was not an enemy or a stranger, but someone who needed her mother's help. The woman turned her eyes back to the ridge. The figures were closer now, their outlines sharper against the sky. She could see the way they moved, cautious, deliberate, like hunters closing in on prey. Her stomach tightened with dread. The girl whispered, her voice small but steady. "Mama, who are they?" The woman didn't answer right away. She had seen too many kinds of men in her life, raiders who took what they wanted, soldiers who carried orders like chains, settlers who would burn a camp just to claim the land beneath it. She didn't know which kind these were, but all of them meant danger. "Stay quiet," she said at last, her voice low. The Apache's hand twitched against the girl's, his eyes never leaving the ridge. His breathing grew shallow, not from fear but from the sharp awareness of a man who had faced death too many times. He knew how men hunted, how they watched, how they killed. His pride screamed at him to stand, to meet them as a warrior should, but his body would not obey. That truth cut deeper than any blade. The woman reached into the wagon and pulled out the old rifle that lay hidden beneath a folded quilt. Her hands trembled only for a moment before they steadied on the wood. She had used it before, though never without cost. Every time she pulled the trigger, a piece of her spirit seemed to burn away, but out here, mercy and survival often came hand in hand with violence. The mule brayed softly, sensing the tension in the air. The woman pressed her lips together, praying the sound would not carry. The figures on the ridge paused, one of them lifting an arm to point in their direction. Her heart nearly stopped. They had been seen. The little girl looked up at her mother, her small hand still wrapped around the Apache's. "Mama," she whispered again, her voice trembling now. The woman forced a calm she did not feel. "Stay down. Do not move." The Apache shifted under the blanket, his hand tightening on the child's as though to anchor himself. He knew the moment was slipping fast, that the enemy's eyes were upon them. His voice was rough, urgent, but low. "If they come, you must run." The girl shook her head fiercely. "No, Mama can help you." Her innocence was unshaken, as if danger could not shatter the faith she carried. The Apache's gaze softened again, though pain flickered in his eyes. He had never known such trust from the children of settlers. The woman steadied her rifle, watching as the figures began their slow descent from the ridge. Every step brought them closer, and every breath felt heavier than the last. She did not know if they were armed, but she knew the odds were against them. She had a broken warrior, a little girl, a tired mule, and her own fading strength. Yet she also knew something else. The frontier had taught her that people were often stronger in the face of desperation than they ever believed. The land around them seemed to wait silent and heavy. The crow circled lower, its shadow sweeping across the grass. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of voices, too far to make out but close enough to stir fear. The Apache closed his eyes briefly, listening, his instincts sharper than any sight. When he opened them again, they burned with a quiet fire. The woman glanced down at him, and in that moment, she saw not just a wounded man but a piece of the land itself, proud, broken, yet unyielding. She knew he carried stories in his scars, stories that might explain why fate had left him here on this trail. But there was no time to ask, no time to know. Only the creeping shadow of danger moving closer with every heartbeat. The girl leaned against him, whispering with all the seriousness a child could muster. "Mama's going to fix you. You'll see. Then you can help us too." The Apache did not answer, but his eyes flickered with something between disbelief and longing. The woman raised her rifle higher, her finger resting near the trigger. She had no choice but to stand between her daughter and whatever was coming. The mule shifted nervously, the wagon creaked, and the world narrowed to the ridge where figures drew nearer and nearer. The land was vast, yet in that moment it felt as small as the space beneath the wagon's shadow where hope, fear, and a fragile promise hung by a thread. And as the sun slipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold, the ridge no longer held distant shapes. It held men, moving steadily down, their eyes fixed on the wagon, closing the distance step by step. The woman's grip tightened, the Apache's breath deepened, and the little girl's innocent faith shone brighter against the growing dark. The prairie held its silence, waiting for the clash that was certain to come, while the promise of healing and the shadow of violence pressed together in a single, unbearable pause. The men on the ridge kept coming, their shapes cutting sharper against the dying light. The mother squinted through the dust and shadow, her rifle heavy in her hands, her finger resting just above the trigger. She counted them again. 4, maybe more, hidden just beyond the rise. Their movements weren't careless, not like drifters wandering in search of food or whiskey. No, these men walked with caution, scanning the land as though hunting something or someone. The Apache stirred beneath the blanket, his jaw tight. His breathing had steadied, not from ease but from the discipline of a warrior who knew when silence was his only weapon. He had lived through battles, raids, ambushes in the dead of night, but this was different. He was not standing with his brothers. He was not holding a weapon. He was a broken man lying at the mercy of a settler woman and her child. That truth burned deeper than the pain in his legs. The little girl, still at his side, whispered to him as though speaking would keep him safe. "Mama won't let them hurt us." She won't. Her small fingers clung to his, fragile but unyielding. The woman heard her daughter's words, and the weight of them pressed against her chest. She wanted to believe them, but she knew better than anyone how thin the line between safety and death was out here. She had seen neighbors buried with nothing but a wooden cross in the prairie wind to mark their lives. She knew promises could shatter with the sound of a single gunshot. The men drew closer. She could see now the glint of metal at their sides, rifles slung low, knives hanging from belts. Their clothes were worn, dust-caked, the kind of look that came from weeks on the trail. They didn't ride horses, which meant they had either lost them or abandoned them. That detail unsettled her more than anything. Men without horses in this land had nothing to lose. She steadied her voice, speaking low enough for only her daughter and the Apache to hear. "Do not move. Do not speak unless I tell you." She shifted slightly, using the wagon as cover, her rifle ready. The figures finally reached the flat ground. 4 men, just as she had counted. Their faces were rough, beards scraggly, eyes hard from living too long with hunger and dust. One of them raised a hand, as if in greeting, though the gesture felt more like a trap than peace. "Evening," the man called, his voice carrying across the dry air. "Looks like you're out here alone." The woman didn't lower her rifle. "Keep your distance." The man chuckled, though there was no warmth in it. "Now that's no way to greet travelers. We've been walking a long while. Thirsty work, you know. Thought maybe you'd share a drink. Maybe more." The little girl's grip on the Apache's hand tightened. She looked up at her mother, confusion and fear crossing her face. The Apache's eyes narrowed, watching the men closely, reading their stance, their spacing, their intent. The woman raised her voice, strong and steady. "You've had your greeting. Keep moving." The men exchanged looks, their smiles thin and sharp. The leader shrugged, taking a slow step forward. "Don't mean to trouble you, miss, but you see, we can't just keep moving. Not when there's a wagon, a mule, and maybe something worth our time." His gaze flicked to the wagon, lingering too long. He hadn't seen the Apache yet, hidden in the shadow beneath the blanket, but it was only a matter of time. The mother's pulse quickened. She had faced danger before, but always with others around, neighbors, her husband when he still lived, the strength of a small community to lean on. Now it was just her daughter, and a man too broken to stand. She lifted the rifle higher, her voice firm. "One more step and you'll regret it." The men stopped, though the leader smirked as if amused. "Feisty one, aren't you? I like that." He shifted his weight, eyes darting again to the wagon. "What's under there? You hiding something?" The little girl gasped softly, and the Apache's hand tightened around hers. The woman felt the air grow heavier, the balance tipping toward violence. Before she could answer, the mule brayed again, tugging at the reins. The blanket covering the Apache shifted slightly in the commotion, and one of the men caught sight of the movement. His eyes narrowed, and he stepped to the side for a clearer look. "Well now," he said slowly, "looks like you've got company." The leader's eyes followed, and his smirk widened. "An Apache. And here I thought we'd just find a lonely woman and her kid." His tone darkened, laced with something cruel. "This is better than I hoped." The Apache met his gaze, silent but burning with pride. He would not beg. He would not explain. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. The woman felt her daughter press against her side, trembling. She wanted to shield her from the men's words, from the danger hanging thick in the air, but there was no shield here, only the truth of the land. The leader tilted his head. "Tell me, miss, why's a settler woman hiding an Apache under her wagon? Don't you know what people would say if they saw this?" The woman gripped her rifle tighter. She had no answer that would make sense to these men, no reason that would spare them from the greed in their eyes. Her silence seemed to amuse them further. The Apache finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "If you want to fight, fight me. Leave them." The men laughed, harsh and mocking. One of them spat into the dirt. "Fight you? You can't even stand." The girl's voice broke through the tension, high and innocent. "He's not broken. My mama can make him walk again." The words hung in the air like a spark over dry grass. The men looked at her, then at the woman, then back to the Apache. Their laughter grew louder, crueler, but beneath it was something else: interest. The leader stepped closer, ignoring the rifle pointed at his chest. "Is that so? Well, now I'm curious. Maybe we'll let him live long enough to see if that's true. Or maybe we'll take him with us and see if your mama follows." The woman's heart hammered. The conflict was no longer just about survival. It was about the fragile thread of trust between her daughter and the Apache, about the dangerous interest these men now had in both. She knew whatever choice she made would ripple far beyond this moment. The Apache's pride burned hotter. To be spoken of like an object, to be mocked for his weakness, was more unbearable than the pain in his body. Yet he stayed still, his hand never releasing the child's, as though her small grip anchored him in a storm he could not control. The woman steadied her rifle, her voice like steel. "Take another step and I'll shoot." The men hesitated, their laughter fading into tense silence. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the plain. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, its cry carried by the wind. The sound seemed to slice through the moment, a reminder that the land held dangers far beyond what any of them could see. The leader's smile faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "You've got spirit," he said, "but spirit won't save you. Not out here." He gestured to his men, and slowly they spread out, circling like wolves around prey. The woman's rifle could only point one way at a time, and they knew it. The girl pressed her face against the Apache's arm, whispering again with fierce certainty, "Mama will protect us, and you'll walk again." "I know it." The Apache's eyes closed briefly, her words like a flame against the cold inside him. For the first time in many days, he wanted to believe. The woman drew in a deep breath, steadying herself as the men closed in. Every choice, every breath, every heartbeat felt balanced on the edge of a blade. She knew this moment would shape all that followed: their survival, their trust, and perhaps even the fate of the broken warrior who lay hidden in the shadow of her wagon. The wind swept across the prairie, carrying dust and silence. The standoff stretched, unbroken, the danger pressing closer with every heartbeat, the promise of violence hanging heavy in the air, waiting for the first spark to set it ablaze. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in streaks of fire and ash. Shadows grew long across the dry earth, stretching out like dark fingers reaching for the wagon. The woman kept the rifle steady, her knuckles white, though her arms ached from holding it so long. The four men moved slowly, fanning out with measured steps, their eyes locked on her like wolves circling a deer. She could feel the heat of her daughter's small body pressed against her leg, hear the faint rattle of the Apache's breathing beneath the blanket. Every sound, every movement was sharpened by the tension. The leader of the men didn't rush. His grin was cruel, but his eyes were cold and calculating. He was waiting for her to make a mistake, for her rifle to waver, for her fear to break. He knew a woman alone with a child couldn't hold out forever, but he hadn't counted on the silent figure half hidden by the wagon, the broken warrior who watched him with eyes full of fire. The Apache's hand gripped the dirt, fingers digging deep. His pride burned at being unable to stand, unable to fight, yet his spirit refused to surrender. He could sense the danger pressing in, feel the weight of lives hanging in the balance. His gaze flicked to the little girl, her trust in him unshaken, and something inside him hardened. He would not let her faith be wasted. The woman called out, her voice steady despite the fear knotting her chest. "That's far enough." The leader laughed low. "Or what? You'll shoot one of us? You've got 4 rifles staring you down and a child clutching at your skirts. You can't win, miss. Better to put that gun down before someone gets hurt." The girl, hearing his words, lifted her chin. "Mama doesn't miss." Her voice was small but firm, her innocence cutting sharper than any weapon. The men chuckled, but there was unease in their eyes. The prairie had taught them not to underestimate desperate people. And there was something in the way the woman held her rifle that told them she had fired it before. The leader shifted his weight, circling another step. The woman swung her rifle toward him, keeping the barrel steady. "One more step and you'll learn I'm not bluffing," he smirked, but didn't move closer. Instead, he gestured to the man on his left. That one began to edge toward the wagon, his eyes fixed on the blanket. The Apache saw him coming. His body tensed, his hand twitching toward the knife still sheathed at his side. It was the only weapon he had, and even that felt like a cruel reminder of his broken state. Still, he slid it free, the blade glinting faintly in the fading light. The woman caught the motion from the corner of her eye. For a moment, their gazes met. No words passed between them, but understanding did. She would not be alone in this fight. The men drew closer still. The mule stomped and brayed, sensing the danger, pulling at the reins until the wagon jolted. Dust rose around them, curling in the air, making it harder to see. The woman's breath quickened. She had been in tight spots before, but never with her child caught in the middle, never with a wounded stranger depending on her. The little girl pressed her cheek against the Apache's arm, whispering softly, "Don't worry. Mama will protect us. And when you walk again, you'll protect us too." Her words struck the Apache like an oath. He gritted his teeth, pushing his body against the pain, readying himself for whatever came next. The leader raised his hand, and the circling stopped. His voice carried sharp across the still air. "You've got one chance, woman. Put the gun down, step aside, and let us take what we want. Or we take it anyway, and you watch your world burn." The woman's finger tightened on the trigger. Every part of her screamed to fire to end this standoff before it could break. But she knew the moment she pulled that trigger, the land would erupt in chaos. If she missed, they would all be dead. Even if she didn't, 3 rifles would answer faster than she could aim again. The Apache's eyes never left the men. His chest heaved with the effort of holding still, every muscle tight with the strain of his useless legs. He was a warrior, but he had never felt so trapped, so helpless. Yet he knew the fight was coming. It always came, whether you wanted it or not. The girl suddenly pointed toward the ridge, her young voice breaking through the tension. "Look." Every head turned. On the far horizon, a second line of riders appeared, their silhouettes dark against the last of the sun. They were too far to identify, but their presence was undeniable. Dust rose behind them like a storm, and the glint of weapons caught the light. The 4 men froze, unease flashing in their eyes. The leader cursed under his breath, his careful control slipping for the first time. "Who in blazes is that?" The woman's heart pounded. She didn't know if the riders meant danger or salvation, but she knew the balance of power had shifted. The 4 men no longer had her cornered alone. A new force had entered the game, and no one knew what side they were on. The Apache narrowed his eyes, straining to see. His people had taught him to read movement from miles away, to know friend from foe by the way a rider sat in the saddle, by the rhythm of hooves in the dirt. But from here, the figures were only shadows, closing the distance with steady speed. The leader spat into the dirt, his eyes flicking between the woman, the Apache, and the approaching riders. He barked an order, and his men closed ranks again, no longer circling but standing shoulder to shoulder. Their confidence was shaken, but their danger remained. The woman lowered her rifle slightly, though she kept her finger near the trigger. She couldn't fight both groups, not alone. But if the riders came against the 4 men, maybe she'd have a chance. Or maybe they'd all be swallowed in the storm together. The little girl's hand tightened on the Apache's. "They're coming for us," she whispered, her voice full of childlike certainty. The Apache did not answer. His gaze stayed locked on the horizon, his body taut with the knowledge that fate was about to break open around them. He could feel it in the air, the way the wind shifted, the way the animals grew restless, the way silence clung too tightly to the land. The sun slipped lower, leaving only a thin line of light across the plains. The 4 men shifted nervously, their weapons drawn now, their eyes darting between the wagon and the horizon. The woman steadied herself, her pulse loud in her ears, her breath shallow but controlled. The riders grew larger, clearer, their shapes no longer just shadows. Dust swirled in their wake, and the faint rhythm of hooves carried across the plain, each beat like a drum calling the moment closer. The leader of the 4 raised his rifle, his voice sharp and angry. "Whoever they are, they won't take what's ours. You hear me, woman? That Apache, that wagon, that mule, it all belongs to us." The Apache's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the knife. He had been called many things in his life, but never anyone's property. The fire in his eyes burned hotter than his broken body, ready to fight with whatever strength remained. The little girl's voice broke the silence again, soft but unshaken. "No, he belongs with us." Her words struck like lightning, cutting through fear and greed alike. The woman felt her throat tighten, her arms shaking with the weight of the rifle. The Apache's eyes flicked toward the girl, and for the first time, he let a spark of hope rise beneath the pain. The riders thundered closer now, their shapes clear enough to count. 7, armed, moving with purpose. The ground trembled faintly with their approach. The 4 men raised their weapons higher, their voices tense with curses and half-formed plans. The woman kept her rifle up, caught between one danger and another, knowing that the moment of choice was seconds away. The Apache shifted beneath the blanket, his knife clutched tight, every muscle burning with the will to rise, to fight, to prove he was not broken. The little girl pressed against him, fearless in her innocence, her words echoing like a promise. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. The last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving only shadows and fire across the sky. The riders closed in, the 4 men braced themselves, and the woman's finger tightened on the trigger, caught in the storm that was about to break. The prairie stood still, the silence before thunder, the edge of the blade before it cut. Every soul there knew the clash was moments away, the kind of moment that would shape all that came after. And no one knew who would rise when the dust settled. The storm had broken just before dawn, leaving the valley washed clean as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. The air was sharp and cool, carrying the scent of wet pine and turned earth. Smoke from the old cabin's chimney curled against the pale sky, and inside, the fire burned low but steady. The paralyzed Apache sat close to the hearth, his eyes reflecting both the flickering flames and the long road he had traveled within himself. His body still bore the scars of battle, but something deeper had shifted, something no weapon or war could carve. The little girl stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She was so small, yet her words had carried more power than she could ever know when she first spoke them. Her voice had been the spark, but her mother had been the guiding hand that turned that spark into a flame of hope. The woman moved quietly around the room, her face weary yet calm, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this day. She had given all she could, not only of her skill but of her heart, and though no one could promise what would come next, there was a feeling in the room that something had already changed forever. Outside, the land stretched wide and endless, a reminder of how small people could seem against the weight of time and wilderness. Yet it was in that very land that their stories had taken root. The settlers who struggled to survive, the warriors who fought to defend their people, the children who bridged the gap between worlds, all had left footprints in the soil. The valley had seen blood and fire, but now it carried something else, the fragile seed of healing. The Apache slowly tried to shift his weight, his hands gripping the chair, the effort written across his face. Each attempt was a battle, each movement a war fought in silence. The girl watched, her breath held tight, while her mother steadied him with a quiet touch. When his leg finally trembled with the smallest stir of life, the firelight caught the tears on his cheeks. It was not just his body he was trying to reclaim, it was his spirit, his place in a world that had cast him aside. Word of what was happening began to travel, carried from mouth to mouth across the scattered cabins, and even whispered among camps hidden in the hills. Some dismissed it as nothing more than wild tales, but others felt it in their bones. The thought that a paralyzed warrior might stand again stirred both awe and unease. Healing in those days was a mystery as much as a skill, and what the woman had done was not easily understood. Yet those who had doubted her now found themselves wondering if something greater was at work. The tension that had once drawn lines between people began to soften, if only a little. Settlers who once looked with fear at the Apache now watched him with a strange respect. Among his own people, whispers rose of whether this was a sign, a turning in the path laid out for them. The girl, innocent of the weight of such questions, simply held his hand and told him she knew he would walk again. Her certainty was like sunlight after a long winter, warming all who stood near it. Days turned into weeks, and though progress came slowly, it came. Each step, no matter how small, carried the strength of two worlds leaning toward each other. The woman's healing hands, the Apache's will, and the child's unwavering faith formed a bond that was stronger than the divisions outside their cabin walls. Suspicion still lingered, and old grudges did not vanish overnight, but something had shifted. Where there had once been only bitterness, there was now room for possibility. One evening, when the valley was quiet under a sky full of stars, the Apache finally stood without support. It was not graceful, and it was not long, but it was enough. The girl clapped her hands in delight, her laughter echoing into the night like a song. Her mother watched with tears she did not try to hide, knowing that this moment was more than just healing a body. It was proof that wounds, whether of flesh, of spirit, or of history, could begin to mend if given patience and trust. As the seasons turned, the cabin became a place people sought out, not for riches or trade, but for something rarer, hope. Travelers came with stories of loss, warriors came with quiet questions, and mothers came with children in their arms. Not all could be healed, but all left with the sense that healing was not just about mending what was broken. It was about believing that even in the harshest times, there was a path forward. The Apache, once broken and cast aside, found new purpose in guiding others who carried heavy burdens. He became a symbol, not of conquest or defeat, but of endurance. His steps, unsteady at first, grew stronger, each one carrying the weight of his people's resilience. And though the land around them remained rugged and unforgiving, the bond between those who had once been enemies grew into something more like kinship. The little girl who had started it all with her simple words grew with the seasons. She never forgot the day she had looked into the eyes of a man the world had given up on and told him her mother could make him walk again. She never forgot the fire that lit in his gaze or the way her mother's hands had worked with quiet strength. To her, it was not just a story of healing, it was proof that kindness, even from a child, could change the course of many lives. By the time years had passed, the story of the paralyzed Apache and the woman who healed him was told in both camps and cabins, carried across the plains and mountains. Some told it as a miracle, others as a lesson, but all agreed it was a reminder that people were not so different when stripped down to their struggles and hopes. The valley, once marked by division, now held a memory that united instead of divided. As the fire burned low one quiet night, the Apache sat once more by the hearth, this time with strength in his legs and peace in his heart. The little girl leaned against him, half asleep, while her mother stitched quietly in the lamplight. There was no need for words, no need for promises. They had already proven that even in a world torn by hardship, healing was possible. The sound of the wind outside was gentle, as if the land itself had settled into rest. And so their story found its place in the great tapestry of the frontier, not as one of conquest or defeat, but as a tale of hope, healing, and the quiet power of a child's faith. It was a reminder that in the harshest wilderness, the truest strength often came not from weapons or walls, but from hands that healed, hearts that forgave, and voices that believed in what others thought impossible.